Call a midwife. Something momentous is about to happen. Giles Brandreth, are you free?
Yes, I'm on the case, Andrew, but don't expect a trouble-free roundup this week. This delivery is proving pretty complicated. I've never seen anything quite like it.
I wouldn't bank on that baby's future. Mind you, socialist father Paul Mason thinks we're all doomed, whatever our age.
Can Davos give birth to some new thinking about capitalism?
Well, maybe the milk of human kindness will avert disaster. Gail Porter certainly thinks so.
Compassion, Andrew, it's sadly lacking in the world today.
I know, life's tough, but don't panic. Breathe in, breathe out. Balloon on to hand. Hot towels and earplugs to the ready. Another this week is about to pop. Evening all, welcome to This Week. And as we come on air, the Prime Minister has announced that though she will not oblige Boris Johnson by stumping up more dosh for the NHS, she has decided to finance his idea of a bridge over the Channel, provided he uses Carillion to build it. That way, said the Prime Minister's spokesman, the Boris Bridge will become one of the Foreign Secretary's great infrastructure legacies, along with Boris Island Airport on the Thames Estuary and the Garden Bridge across the Thames in central London, and not forgetting the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, created by Boris during a gap year at Eton. Now, on a personal note, I joined UKIP this morning. By mid-afternoon, I was leader. By early evening, efforts had begun to depose me. But I'm hanging on in. If I can survive till the weekend, I'll be the longest-serving UKIP leader since St Nigel of Farage. And news is just reaching us from Davos that President Trump is locked up in his hotel suite and refusing to come out. Apparently, he's been inconsolable since learning that the Liberal Democrats declared he wasn't welcome in this country. The president's men fear he might never recover from such a snub. Who is Vince Cable to do this to me? The president has just written in a heartbreaking tweet, followed by the even more despairing, who is Vince Cable? Speaking of those who've endured more snubs than they've had votes, I'm joined on the sofa tonight by two men who couldn't even get membership of the President's Club, that well-known group of businessmen committed to women's rights, who stage an annual tribute to feminism at the Dorchester Hotel. In fact, the club decided to wind itself up rather than let these two join. I speak, of course, of Michael #ChooChoo Portillo and Chuka #Smooth Operator Umuna. Welcome to you both. Michael, your moment of the week?
Deservedly, former Prime Minister David Cameron said in Davos that Brexit had been a mistake but not a disaster, that it had turned out not as badly as we feared. Of course, he was the architect of Project Fear. He was the one who told us that there would be immediate economic disaster. The interesting thing to me was that, of course, the remarks were caught off guard by a camera and a microphone that he didn't realise were listening to him. Because David Cameron never submits himself to public scrutiny. He never appears to answer questions as to why he held this referendum and plunged us into the state we're in, because whether you're pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit, 5 years of national life is being absorbed by this topic, which I think was
and he's gone.
Entirely unnecessary. And of course, he walked off the field the next day. It's difficult now to remember the cause of it all, but the cause of it all was UKIP, and I believe they're a subject for discussion later.
They are indeed. So hold any other further thoughts. We'll stick at that one moment. Chuka, your moment.
My moment is a very moving, incredible speech given by Baroness Tessa Jown of Brixton in the House of Lords.
A friend of this programme.
She's been incredible to so many of us, such a mentor. She's one of the kindest, most genuine, most generous people in British politics, and absolutely typical of her as she goes through this battle with cancer, that she should use her own situation to campaign to improve the opportunities for others going through what she's going through to access the very best medical research, trials, etc. And it's extraordinary. You very rarely see, in fact never see in the House of Lords, a round of applause.
No.
She got more than that. She got a standing ovation of several minutes. And Tessa, if you're watching, we all wish you well, and we're right behind you.
We do indeed. We wish you well. And we say to our viewers, you can see this on the BBC iPlayer or on YouTube. It's worth watching, both Tessa's speech and the follow-up reaction to it from the House of Lords. Now, before we go any further, a little reminder that we're having a party in South London on the evening of March the 1st. If you'd like to come along, you need to follow the instructions on the This Week website or the Twitter. We can't take all of you because, I mean, there are at least 50 viewers. So if you're thinking of applying, pull out the stops and tell us why on earth you'd want to come along. I'll be interested to see that. Now, there was a time during the long Thatcher, Major, Blair, Brown years when it looked as if British socialism had been consigned to the dustbin of history, along with the donkey jackets so many of the militant left like to wear. Even a real crisis of capitalism, the great crash of 2008, did not revive it. Indeed, Labour was replaced by a centre-right coalition. But the sclerotic recovery from that crash, the long shadow of austerity, stagnant real wages, and a new generation which doesn't see what's so great about capitalism when it has no capital, and of course has never been served a British rail sandwich, all that has put socialism back on the agenda, and Jezza in control of the Labour Party. So are we on the brink of a new Red Dawn? Here's Paul Mason with his take of the week.
The global elite assembled at Davos have one job, and that's to imagine how an automated digital capitalism could work, and for everybody. The capitalism we've got now clearly doesn't work. Sure, you can print $12 trillion and that will send stock markets and house prices soaring, but the long-term sources of growth like rising populations or better education are running out. And technological innovation, contrary to all the hype, isn't really contributing to growth we can measure. And that's because its main effect is to collapse the price of everything. In the meantime, the global system is breaking up. It doesn't start with trade, but with things like the internet or different encryption laws or even artificial intelligence, where suddenly there's an arms race. Meanwhile, all over the developed world, people are losing their belief in mainstream politics, in democratic culture, and even in the rule of law. If all you get from rising growth is rising inequality, that's going to get worse. That's what's driven Donald Trump and what's driving support for the far right in Germany. They say with these Davos events, you've seen one, you've seen them all. As one World Bank economist put it only this week, these are people who won't pay the living wage, but they will sponsor a symphony orchestra. But I can see a change. The original idea behind Davos, a kind of confident, liberal, democratic capitalism, has become more of a thin veneer, and it's the crooks and the autocrats and the demagogues who are starting to set the agenda. The choice facing people at Davos is find a new form of capitalism that stops driving inequality, or popular pressure is going to pull the global system apart and push politics to the extremes a lot.
And our thanks to Concrete Space in Shoreditch. We welcome Paul Mason. Michael, is global capitalism in crisis?
No, I mean, I would put forward a number of other facts. I mean, communist China has adopted capitalism. The former Soviet Union has adopted capitalism. I think the only country in the world that hasn't adopted capitalism now is North Korea. The effects of capitalism has been to make people much richer. The average income of the global population has doubled in the last 10 years. There's a middle class now in India of hundreds of millions. There's a middle class in China of hundreds of millions. So capitalism is highly successful. The alternative, communism, has always been associated with mass murder. Mao killed 50 million, Stalin killed 30 million. So, no, I think we do well to stick with capitalism. And capitalism has its ups and downs, but no, capitalism is very successful across the world.
Let me get you to respond to that before I bring Chuka in.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wrote a book called Post-Capitalism, because people like me have no intention of trying to relive the horrors of the state command planning, forced march,
Like the
Soviet Union, China, etc. Although, the Chinese Communist Party is quite popular among capitalists, of course, at the moment. No, the reason, I could be wrong, but the reason why I think I am not is that there is something special about the technology that we are trying to apply that is different to all the other machine technologies. It is an information machine acts differently, and as I said there in the VT, it collapses the price of everything. Now, my take on the crisis we're living through, it's not just a cyclical thing that a few banks got a few things wrong. It's a signal that that there isn't value coming down the line towards us from the future, such as the big tech companies think there is. The technology just really doesn't provide
But is
that
that
new
a crisis
wave
of technology rather than capitalism?
Well, it will
Because whether it's capitalism or communism, it has to adopt technology.
Look, absolutely, but the problem about if technology does not create value, i.e. tangible GDP, monetizable value, then we've borrowed 70 trillion now? No, 270 billion is the global, no, it's got to be trillion, isn't it?
It's trillion.
Yeah. On the basis of what? On the basis of we pay it back in future through growth, and that growth has to be monetary, it has to be market.
Let me bring Chuka in to get his in. Is capitalism in crisis? I mean, Oxfam said this week, really moving into the political rather than the charity stage, we're dominated by an extreme form of capitalism. Is that right?
Did Oxfam used to be a charity once rather than a political organisation? I've forgotten that.
It is still a charity.
Oh, is it? Oh, sorry.
It has charitable status.
Yes, there is a crisis of capitalism. In a way, I disagree with both Michael and Paul. I disagree with Michael because his argument is, if you look at overall levels of poverty across the world, growing middle classes in Asia and Africa, etc., the numbers of people living in poverty have relatively reduced, and there is research to back that up. However, it ignores
it's not relative.
Absolute.
Extreme poverty
is not.
Was people who fell into extreme poverty, and it's very extreme definition of poverty, accounted for 40% of the globe in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Today it's under 10%.
Yeah, absolutely. So I
totally
accept. I accept that point. But what it ignores is actually the impact of inequality. And on this is where I slightly take issue with Paul's analysis of what's going to happen with this technology. The truth is, we don't know whether there's going to be a net increase or loss in jobs. I think where there is more research to back up a claim is that these technologies, I think, could exacerbate inequality. And I think the challenge for capitalism going forward is how do we ensure more people actually have capital, and how do you prevent relative inequality growing? What I wasn't totally sure, actually, Paul, and I'm slightly abusing my position, is I wanted to ask you a question. Are you saying that you want a different form of capitalism, or do you want to do away with it altogether? Because, I'm a social democrat, I'm a Keynesian, I want the public and private sectors to work together.
Look, both. In the sense that my prognosis in this book, called Post-Capitalism, is that the technology eats the market. I mean, that's in 3 words. The technology is going to eat the market over a century because it won't provide a renewable capitalism in the way that other waves of technological innovation have. But that doesn't solve our problem. We're not going to get post-capitalism in the next 20 years. So we have to design a kind of capitalism that solves the problem of now.
So you do want capitalism?
No, absolutely, and I've got no problem. Actually, I'd be closer to some of the right-wing critics of Oxfam's report than some of the sort of general sort of uncritics of it. Because Marx once said, of course, that the bourgeoisie is obliged to continually revolutionise the means of production. That's what's happened. The problem we've got is, I think it is more built in than you maybe do, or you, Michael, the inequality within nations is demonstrably built in to the current model of accumulation. And I see that as half of what is driving the polarisation.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, I think there are different forms of capitalism and they bake in inequality in different ways. And I think And I think the other issue I had with your piece actually is, I mean, classically, I suppose, on the left, we look at inequality and economic inequalities, but also there are cultural issues here, which are some related to inequality and economic factors, but actually there's a whole, kind of culture war value discourse going on.
All systems bring about inequality, and communist systems brought about massive inequality between the ruling class and all the rest. The difference is that in capitalism, the people at the bottom are always getting richer. They are participating in the wealth. In communist societies, as we remember, I mean, the communist societies literally went bankrupt. They were unable to sustain themselves. Also, I mean, the characteristic
We've really been getting richer, though?
Yes, we have been getting richer.
In recent times?
Yes, in recent times. The people you see in the street now are wearing shoes. They are being educated. They have health care. Obesity is now a characteristic of the poor. I mean, if you'd said to people in the 19th century that obesity was going to be a characteristic of the poor, they would have been absolutely amazed. And this idea that technology makes things cheaper, it has always made things cheaper. And what that means is, of course, that people can afford more. They can buy more things because they're cheaper. And as they buy more things, so the demand becomes more widespread, and so the employment opportunities become greater. I mean, I'm absolutely unconvinced at this stage that AI, artificial intelligence, is going to be any different from any other technological innovation, all of which so far have replaced labour-intensive technologies with new labour-intensive technologies. We're always able to see the jobs that are being destroyed. We're never able to foresee the ones that are going to be created.
You wrote your book at a time when the recovery from the crash was still very slow, and it's the slowest recovery from any downturn in recent memory. But only in the past 18 months things have changed. The Eurozone is now showing growth. You used to cover it. There was no growth. The American economy, 3% looks more normal now than 2%. The emerging markets are growing strongly.
What I think, I take my cue from not only my own research, but say the Bank of England. Bank of England did a big research project on long-term sources of growth. And it basically says the extra workers and the increased education that's driven global growth the last 30 years, that's running out. The catching up growth that China's done, that's going to run out. And the Bank of England sees, its economists, it's not its official prediction, sees growth is about 1.5 in the next 30 years. Now, if that's true, then the success stories are the countries that fight for their bit of it. And this is the big mind bender for those of us who've grown up for the last 30 years thinking that the global economy is simply a win-win. Trump might indeed achieve 3% growth and reindustrialization through America first. And I think if he does, in say 2 or 3 years' time, other countries will be looking at that and saying, well, we want some of that because China's already.
One can do it.
That's
what
I'm
trying to do.
Then we get the 1930s, and you get the zero sum or negative sum game. That's why what I'm saying there is defend globalization by doing less of it.
But just to bring it back into today's politics, let's assume you're right for this final question to you, I'm not quite sure what difference a Corbyn government versus a May government would really make to this.
Oh, I think it would make a massive difference. Look, the thing that sticks me to Corbyn, for all the differences I might have with him on minor issues, is that he's the first social democratic politician that is prepared to say neoliberalism is over. The whole model for the last 30 years, Blair, Thatcher, Major, Brown, is over. We need a new one.
He's not a social democrat, though.
Of course he's a social democrat. I'm a radical social
he's
democrat.
He's never had any empathy with the Swedish
And Blair and
social
Brown were not
Democrats,
neoliberal.
or the German social democrats, or Gordon Brown, who was a social democrat.
Yeah, they weren't neoliberals.
Well, I do. It's a semantic issue.
That's quite important.
Well,
they're not. It's quite pretty major. If you introduce tax credits, national minimum wage, you do infrastructure investment, etc., that's not neoliberal.
Final thought from you, Paul.
Final thought is, I think there's actually what a Labour government has to do is to create a new normal, like the Attlee government did. That means probably knocking off the hard edges of what it wants. But I think the new consensus has to be what I said in that VT: a kind of capitalism that starts to suppress inequality and drive growth, not through money printing. And I think if Labour can deliver that, then the Tory government that comes after it, when we're probably all gone off this sofa, would have to start from a very different premise than the last 30 years.
Right. We shall see. Paul, thank you for being with us. Now it's late. Boris Johnson's mummified great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother late. Yes, in a world where fact increasingly outfreaks fiction and freaks out the rest of us, scientists have used DNA from a mummified big toe, I'm not making this up, honest, to establish that the Foreign Secretary is related to the toe's owner, a 16th century Swiss noblewoman, naturally. Sadly, Anna Katharina Bischoff died of mercury poisoning in a failed attempt to cure her syphilis. But stop sniggering at the back. Researchers think she contracted it while caring for those with sexually transmitted diseases, allowing Bojo to dub her a pioneer in sexual health care. And from a powerful woman of the 16th century to a well-known woman of today, TV presenter and former model Gail Porter will be shining the spotlight on compassion. And if you'd like to get in touch on the Twitter, the Facebook or the Snap Numpty, then you know where you can stick your cyber ramblings. Just say, I'm sure someone out there is interested in what you have to say, but I suspect most folks, they couldn't give a flying paxman. Now, this week's cabinet meeting will forever be known as the beasting of Boris, in response to his spin doctors revealing in advance that he was going to raise the case for more money for the NHS. The Prime Minister presided over a staged humiliation of the Foreign Secretary, as minister after minister lectured him on the constitutional convention that what happens in cabinet stays in cabinet. How do we know all this? Because the Downing Street spinners leaked a blow-by-blow account of the cabinet discussion, clearly considering it more important to know about the biffing of Boris than adhering to their own constitutional niceties. Speaking of niceties, here's Giles Brandreth and some Sunday night period drama involving babies.
Hours of agony, pushing and screaming, tirades of abuse, and then a tiny, bloody reward. Yes, it's the This Week Roundup, and it's a messy business. Still, so long as you've got plenty of hot towels and you stay up at the head end, you should get through it. Speaking of painful comings and goings, UKIP's leader, Henry Bolton, began the week defending his position after his party's ruling committee voted to remove him by caesarean section after his girlfriend had made racist remarks about Prince Harry's fiancée, Meghan Markle. But it takes more than a racist girlfriend and a vote of no confidence to get rid of a man like Henry Bolton, who can strangle a badger with his bare hands.
I will not be resigning as party leader. It is now time to put an end to the factional infighting that has been going on within the party for some time, and to remove those who have been part of that. In a single phrase, it is time to drain the swamp.
The swamp is draining all of its own, as 14 senior UKIP figures have quit their posts ahead of next month's ballot, when the party membership will decide whether or not to get rid of Mr. Bolton. Meanwhile, former leader Nigel Farage, epidural at the ready, had these words of encouragement.
It's been an appalling few weeks, and I think Henry Bolton has shown very bad judgment. I'm not saying that I support Henry Bolton, but I do support is him saying to the NEC, I'm not going to take your judgment, I will move this on to a full extraordinary general meeting of the UKIP membership.
Duty calls. Hello, Brandreth Birthing. How may I help you? Labour complications. It seems the patient has split from the EU, but is still umbilically attached to the single market. Very tricky.
You can have access to the single market, but
so you could be effectively members of the single market.
You'll have access, but you will not be a decision maker when it comes to the rules, and that's quite important.
The process can be toughest on expectant leavers. There they are, hoping for a bouncing baby Brexit, brimming with bilateral trade deals, and they end up pacing up and down in the waiting room, stuck in transition. The Brexit secretary reminded us that you can't rush these things.
Aren't we just still acting as if we are in the European Union, we're bound by the European Union, we are lackeys of the European Union?
We're acting as a law-abiding country.
A bit bolder.
We are not going to break those undertakings, laws, commitments, call them what you want.
We're leaving. We don't need to behave as if we're a permanent member.
And no need for forceps. DD also reassured them that the UK wouldn't pay for access to the single market.
I don't see us paying for access. I think, bear in mind, I could turn around to Mr. Barnier and say, OK, I'll pay you for access. I'll pay you £1 for every £1,000 of business we sell to you, as long as you pay me £1 for every £1,000 of business you sell to me. I think I'll make money on the deal.
Meanwhile, the man responsible was in a positive mood. Baby Brexit may have been a mistake, but Daddy Dave says it could have been worse.
So, as I keep saying, it's a mistake, not a disaster. It's turned out less bad than we had. It's still maybe difficult.
Modern man, Dave, unlike some. MPs this week debated the latest sexual harassment scandal, following reports that an undercover journalist had been groped at an exclusive men-only charity event called the President's Club.
What happened was that women were bought as bait for men who are rich men, not a mile from where we stand, as if that is an acceptable behaviour. It is totally unacceptable.
Well, this seems to be the place. Hello, did you call the midwife? Oh. Wouldn't you be happier in a hospital, Mother? Not sure we could manage a bed at the moment, but they do a lovely line in corridors. Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, was recommending to the Cabinet spending oodles more money on the NHS, but the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, felt he'd had enough of Boris's line in gas and air. Oh.
Mr Johnson is the Foreign Secretary. I gave the Health Secretary an extra £6 billion at the recent budget, and we'll look at departmental allocations again at the spending review when that takes place.
At Prime Minister's questions, the waters broke. Boris Johnson's intervention was a gift for Jeremy Corbyn, who demanded more money too for the NHS. But Mrs May, the nation's matron, downplayed the crisis and told us that her government was spending a fortune on the NHS. Our Mother.
Prime Minister is frankly in denial about the state of the NHS. Even the absent Foreign Secretary recognises it, but the Prime Minister isn't listening. When is she going to face up to the reality and take action to save the NHS from death by 1,000 cuts?
This is a government that is backing the NHS plan, that is putting more money into the NHS, because this is a government that recognises the priorities of the British people.
Oh, nearly there, Mother. Nearly there. Oh, look. Oh, beautiful baby. Coochie, coochie, cooch. We're going to call you little Eugenie. Oh, it's a boy and a bruiser. We'll call you Andrew Neil. Mother, well done.
And we'd like to reassure the Nursing and Midwifery Council and expectant mothers everywhere who may have been concerned by that film that no women or children were harmed during the making of it. We thank to Balfs, the Bikes of Dulwich, South London, who are to blame for putting Giles on two wheels. And with us now, UKIP's fairy godmother, Christine Hamilton. So, is UKIP in its death throes?
Who knows?
Well, if anybody knows, it's you.
No, of course I don't know. The next step, as everybody knows, is the Extraordinary General Meeting, which is going to take place in about, I think it's the 18th of February, if that's a Sunday. Nobody knows where it's going to be yet. It's rumoured to be somewhere in the middle of the country, like Coventry or Derby.
No, it's not a secret. It's like a rave.
No, it's not a secret.
Going to meet in the middle of the night.
No, that's because...
You have to go to Facebook.
No. It's not a secret. It's just it's not been organised yet.
Ah, so it is a secret.
It's supposed to be... No, a secret is slightly different for some... Yeah, I know you are. If you put a compass point in the middle of the country, it's supposed to make it easy access for everybody, but it actually just means that it's impossible for anyone to get there.
Does it matter if you change your leader? I mean, if changing your leader worked, you'd be the most successful party in Britain.
I know. I don't know what will happen at the EGM because there's a huge amount of anti-Henry Bolton sentiment out there.
He's the current leader.
He is the current leader, yes, by the skin of his teeth. He is not alone in his clinging on. I think he's being puppeted by Nigel Farage, and Farage is a very strong force in UKIP, and a lot of people follow Farage, come what may. So it really depends who gets there, who gets to Derby or Coventry.
Who can find out where it is?
No, we'll all be told where it is.
How's he been puppeted? So what's
because
Farage's game here?
I don't think that Henry Bolton is acting entirely off his own bat by saying, I'm not going to go. I think somebody is saying, you hang on in there, Henry. Because, of course, it would suit Farage's book if UKIP did implode or explode, whichever you want to call it, because then that would pave the way for him to come forward with a Farage party, which he would want to do.
Let's get away from the Kremlinology of UKIP, which I think is becoming a diminishing matter of interest to the rest of the country. I'd suggest
you raised it.
No, I'm delighted to let me know when we know where we're going at the weekend. If UKIP is in terminal decline, the significance of that is for Labour, because at the last election, the UKIP vote collapsed back into the Tories.
Yes.
And we went back in England, particularly, to a two-party system. If that's going to be the future, it's tougher for Labour if UKIP is no longer the threat on the Tory flank.
Potentially. I mean, I'm not sure I totally accept the analysis that we had like a reassertion of the two-party system. I think for Labour or Tory alike to think that, just let me...
Well, just by share of the vote you did.
Yes, in that sense, but that presumes that people in every case were voting because and for the parties instead of in spite of them. And I think if either Labour or the Tory party look at the June result last year and go, oh, look, suddenly we're at 83% or whatever it is
That's
again.
the combined Labour-Tory vote.
I think that's very dangerous because I think there were actually quite a lot of people voting for other reasons. Like all the research on the Labour vote from June 2017 shows that a huge number of people voted Labour for the first time, particularly young people, in the belief that we would stop a hard Brexit, as it were. And all the research backs that up. And so I think it's a bit more, complex than it might seem.
That's what helped Labour get Green and Lib Dem votes.
Exactly.
Which is why England, in particular, came back to a two-party system. But I want Labour... And by the way, the polls show...
I suppose I just mean it doesn't mean
it's still a two-party system.
Yeah, I suppose all I'm saying is we're not super popular.
Moving on to an even more macro matter. Michael, didn't we see the real cabinet dividing line on Brexit? It's now been exposed. There are ministers like Mr Hammond, Amber Rudd and others. They want us to continue to shadow most of what the EU does, even if we're no longer in it. And there's Michael Gove, Liam Fox, Boris Johnson. They really want us to strike out on our own. How do you reconcile that? It's irreconcilable, is it not?
Yeah, they're fundamentally different positions. And what I think we've seen in the last week is the sort of organised ganging up on members of the cabinet. I mean, you talked about how they ganged up on Boris to shout him down over the National Health Service. And this evening, a succession of ministers have come out to criticise, and I think quite rightly, what Philip Hammond said about remaining,
closely aligned.
Extraordinarily close, or as close as we possibly could be to the European Union. Yes, I mean, the two positions are pretty irreconcilable. But I think the position of the British people is pretty clear. It is that we must leave the European Union. That is the policy of the government. That is the policy of the Prime Minister.
Given this debate, this division, which is come to the fore as we move on to the next stage, because the next stage of Brexit is for the government to decide what kind of relationship it wants with the EU. That's phase 2. And this argument between close alignment and striking out on our own, if UKIP wasn't fighting among itself all the time, there would be a role for UKIP, from his point of view, of keeping the government's feet to the fire on this.
Well, I think, despite the fact that UKIP is internally fighting, I think there still is a role for UKIP. And although UKIP membership might have plummeted quite a lot, there are still a lot of people out there who support the aims of UKIP, and they don't actually want UKIP to disappear. And I think, going back to what you were asking Chuka earlier, UKIP has always drawn its support. It used to be roughly a third Labour from former Labour, a third former Tory, and a third from people who'd never voted before. And a lot of the UKIP vote actually did go back to Labour, especially in the Welsh Valley areas, for example. So it isn't true to say that all the UKIP voters went to the Tories. I think it's a fairly fluid vote, and who knows what would happen at the next election. And UKIP is necessary, I think, to keep keep the government's feet to the fire, because as Mrs May seems to be holding together, if this extraordinary coalition in the Tory party, and while they've got her, it can continue. But I mean, how much longer can she continue?
It's such a pity that we had a June 2017 election.
Well,
because before that, Labour MPs were really frightened of the fact that in many of their constituencies there had been a Brexit majority. And Labour MPs who came on this sofa were very careful to say how they were going to respect the wishes of the British people. You notice Chuka doesn't bother with that anymore. And also, of course, we now know that UKIP is not a force in the land, whereas after 2015, we still thought it was. So it is a great pity, because what the effect of the 2017 general election has been to lessen the impact of what the British people very clearly decided in 2016.
I'm not so sure about that, funnily enough, because, OK, in 2016 people voted to leave the European Union, a majority of people participated in that referendum, but how was reserved to Parliament. And Theresa May put coming out of the single market and the customs union, pursuing the so-called hard Brexit, she made that the kind of centrepiece of her general election campaign and lost her majority. So I'm not sure you can necessarily read into this that, we can't have a debate and scrutinise what form of Brexit is pursued.
But in that debate, and you're quite right, the nature of the deal requires debate and argument. But in that debate, are you able to tell us, is it Labour's position to remain members of the single market or not?
Well, at the moment, in transition, yes. But in terms of the long term, we haven't come to a decision on that. I'm very clear. I think we should be arguing for us to stay in the single market permanently.
Membership?
Yes, I mean, at the moment...
Which is effectively staying in the EU.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, what is going on is that the leadership is waiting to see if public opinion moves in a particular direction, and they're looking at polling and focus groups. Whereas I'm saying, I would argue, in the end, you've got to lead and make the argument for your values. And when Labour stops making the argument for its values, support for things like poverty reduction, inequality reduction falls. And so it stands to reason if we make the argument for a kind of... Personally, I wish Brexit wasn't happening, but if we at least made the argument for the single market...
If we stay in the single market.
But the people who...
That's his policy.
But hang on just a minute.
He wants to thwart what the British people...
But you can't be a member of the single market unless you have free movement, unless you have
except the ECJ.
Well, there are a number... That may be the right thing to do, but you are staying in.
You're not staying in, because there are a number of countries that participate more or less fully in the single market. Norway, Liechtenstein, Iceland, who are not in the European Union, but participate and are, fully, more or less, in the single market.
Norway has free movement.
But if you're...
Yes, I know, I accept that.
You're saying you respect the views of the British people who voted to come out. They did not vote to come out, yet stay in the single market. That's not what they voted for. They voted to come out.
Staying in the single market wasn't on the ballot paper. I mean, look, in terms of my own constituents, I represent the most Remain constituency in the country. So my constituents are very clear. They would actually rather we weren't leaving the European Union. If we are, they want us to stay in the single market and the customs union.
It might not have been on the ballot paper, but it was clearly understood. Leaving the EU means leaving. Well,
I think £350 million per week for the NHS was the big thing that, got the Leave campaign in.
There's nothing to stop
Sometimes you just wish you had never raised the subject.
There's nothing to stop that money going to the NHS.
It's like Groundhog Day on the referendum. We've run out of time. Christine Hamilton, thank you.
It's all Cameron's fault.
Cameron brought it up.
Rough sleeping rose 15% last year. It's risen every year for the past 7 years. 170% increase since 2010. Tonight, around 4,750 people in England alone are bedding down in doorways, under bridges and in parks. Homelessness in its rawest, cruelest form. We're one of the richest countries in the world with a sophisticated and extensive welfare state. And we like to think we're a compassionate country. So why is rough sleeping on the rise? Tonight, we're putting compassion in the spotlight. Emily Thornberry quoted Thurgood Marshall in a debate on refugees yesterday.
The measure of a country's greatness is its ability to retain compassion in times of crisis.
With rough sleeping rising for the 7th consecutive year, is compassion in short supply these days?
People walk past who know you, what you grew up with and all that, and they just look down their nose at you.
When someone's actions are monstrous, is there any room for compassion?
175 years. I just signed your death warrant.
In turbulent times, do we need to rely on business leaders to inject politics with kindness?
It would be great to have China be a leader in the reduction of inequality, which really fits in with the founding principles that China's run under.
And can you expect much sympathy?
Seen kissing her very intimately in the national...
if your actions collide with your colleagues' principles?
It's all become a bit of a soap opera.
He's now got no mandate at all.
A bit of an embarrassment.
Useless leader. Lost all touch with reality.
Get the hell out of politics.
Gail. Yes.
Gail Porter thinks the world can be a cold place. So how can we be kinder? And Gail Porter is with us now. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much for having me.
We like to think of ourselves as a compassionate nation. Are we fooling ourselves?
Well, do you know what? It's a really difficult thing for me to broach because, I think of myself as a very compassionate person, and I know there's lots of really kind people out there, but I sometimes feel like the government lets us down, and we're let down in so many different ways. I would kind of like to be the Alice in Wonderland of everything's going to be wonderful, but...
Everything is never wonderful, but the growth in rough sleeping is a kind of metaphor for us in some ways, isn't it? You do wonder, why is this being allowed to happen at this stage in 2018 in a rich, advanced country?
Well, I just think it's absolutely appalling that people are still sleeping rough. I mean, I don't know if you know my story, but 6 years ago, I lost my house and I couldn't afford to pay my rent and all the rest of it. And I ended up sleeping rough I was 6 months. Luckily, I had friends I could sleep on their sofas and stuff, but I did sleep rough for a couple of nights in Hampstead Heath, which was extremely scary. And I just think, how does this happen in this day and age? You know, I've worked since I was 15 years old, and unfortunately, I just hit upon a bad time. I've never taken benefits. I've never asked for help. And I suddenly got struck by, I couldn't pay my rent, and then I had nowhere to go. And I walk past people every single day and I just think, how does this even happen? And
although you managed to pull out of that, the great danger when that happens to a lot of people is that it's a descent into hell.
Well, no, exactly. It's like a never-ending circle, because the thing is, they can't apply for benefits if they've not got somewhere to stay because they've not got an address, and and a lot of people can't get work because they haven't got an address. So it's
it just reinforces it.
Yeah, exactly. So
we often expect government to do too much, and government's not very good at doing quite a lot of things. But when you look at the rough sleeping, the growth and the problem, you do wonder why government can't just get a grip of this. I mean, I saw one Tory described this current government as basically a visionless mediocrity. And in a way, you would just think that Mrs. May would get out of bed one morning and just say, look at what's happened here, these figures. We're really going to do something about this.
Well, something has to be done.
I'm slightly surprised at your perspective. Obviously, I travel the world. There is rough sleeping everywhere. In every single country I've ever visited, there is rough sleeping. If there were an answer, then I think at least one country that I visited would have come up with the answer. I remember Tony Blair was swept into Downing Street in 1997 on the promise that he was going to abolish rough sleeping. Of course, he did not.
But it did decline dramatically.
But rough sleeping went on and on. I've lived in London all that time. There's always been rough sleeping. And...
yeah, but it was going in the other direction.
No, Michael, I think...
It was actually going in the other direction. I completely agree with you. And it was. And then it's
It's reduced. I remember Cardboard City, as it was called, on the South Bank. That went. There was a drastic reduction, and since 2010, you've had an increase every single year. In fact, the last year it's increased by 17%. It's definitely related to the withdrawal of support, withdrawal of benefits, the impact on public services of the austerity we've had. I don't know any independent outfit which would deny that.
But what austerity have we had? We've borrowed every year. We've borrowed much more than we've earned. We have the largest deficit in Europe, consistently the largest deficit. But we spend more than 100 billion a year on welfare.
Let me get a final thought from Gil, who's been through this.
Yes, yes.
What would you like to be done? What do you think would allow us to tackle this?
Well, obviously, I'm not a politician, but there needs to be more money put into looking after people that are in situations like myself, you know, people that have worked. You know, I've worked my entire life, and unfortunately I hit a bad patch and there was no one to turn to, and I would have loved to, you know, gone to the government and said, could someone help me? Please help me.
Just to get you through.
Just anything, just sort of even a conversation, just sort of put me in the right direction. And, you know, it's not, I think sometimes people think that homeless people are either, you know, bad people or are going through some sort of terrible situation in their life. Some people are, you know, hard workers, and unfortunately they hit a rough. Yeah.
We're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. But Gil, thanks for being with us. And
thank you very much.
What happened to you. That's your lot for tonight, folks, but not for us. We're off to Lulu's, where it's the President Club's Mea Culpa night, with all-female dining guests and top businessmen serving drinks in short, tight black dresses. I'm told the women have lots of ballroom dancing planned, inspired by the example of our old chum Ed Twinkle Toes Bowles, whose Strictly Come Dancing fame gained him entry to the Donald's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. Told the president was particularly taken by his spangly lycra and energetic rumba. This has inspired Chuka to threaten to perform his Gangnam-style routine, which takes cool to a new level of despair.
You don't want
and Michael will dance the time warp from the Rocky Horror Show just as soon as we get his legs into his fishnet tights. Nighty-night, don't let the special relationship bite.
It's an honor to be with Prime Minister May. We've had a great discussion. We're on the same wavelength in, I think, every respect. The Prime Minister and myself have had a really great relationship, although some people don't necessarily believe that, but I can tell you it's true. I have a tremendous respect for the Prime Minister and the job she's doing. And I think the feeling is mutual from the standpoint of liking each other a lot. And so that was a little bit of a false rumor out there. I just wanted to correct it, frankly, because we have great respect for everything you're doing. And we love your country. We think it's truly good. And we're working on transactions in terms of economic development, trade, maybe most importantly, military. We are very much joined at the hip when it comes to the military. We have the same ideas, the same ideals, and there's nothing that would happen to you that we won't be there to fight for you. You know that. And I just want to thank you very much. This is a great honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you. And we've had, as you say, we've had a great discussion today, and we continue to have that really special relationship between the UK and the United States.